In 1940, the world was on edge. The Nazi war machine, a seemingly unstoppable force of steel and fire, had swept through most of Western Europe. France had fallen, its once mighty army shattered in just weeks. From the shores of Poland to the English Channel, the swastika flag loomed large, casting a dark shadow. Meanwhile, in the east, Imperial Japan was expanding its empire, its ambitions stretching across the Pacific. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, seemed poised for total victory, their alliance a pact of steel aimed at reshaping the globe. With the Axis looking invincible, Britain standing alone, and the United States holding on to neutrality, a question echoes through history. What changed? It wasn't just one battle, one invention, or one political decision that shifted the tide. The answer is far more intricate, a complex web of military turning points, crucial political decisions made in smoke-filled rooms, and secret technological breakthroughs that gave one side a decisive edge. This is the story of how the tide of the Second World War turned. To grasp the turning points, we first need to appreciate the scale of the Axis's initial success. Germany's strategy of blitzkrieg, or lightning war, revolutionized military tactics. It combined air power, armor, and infantry into a single, overwhelming force. Poland fell in weeks. Denmark and Norway followed suit. Then, in May 1940, the Wehrmacht unleashed its fury on France and the Low Countries, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line and punching through the Ardennes Foresta move. The Allies thought impossible, encircling the bulk of the British and French armies. The result, a catastrophe for the Allies. The British Expeditionary Force found itself cornered at Dunkirk, saved only by a miraculous evacuation. By June 1940, Hitler was posing for photographs in a conquered Paris. It seemed nothing could stop him. His gaze now turned to his last remaining European adversary, Great Britain. The Battle of Britain, fought in the skies over southern England during the summer and fall of 1940, was meant to set the stage for a full-scale invasion. The German Luftwaffe aimed to destroy the Royal Air Force, clearing the way for troops to cross the Channel. Day after day, hundreds of German bombers and fighters filled the sky. But here, the first crack in the Axis facade appeared. The RAF, though outnumbered, had two critical advantages. First, they were fighting over home territory. Pilots who were shot down could be back in the air the next day. Second, they had a secret weapon: radar. This groundbreaking technology allowed them to spot German formations assembling across the Channel, giving them precious minutes to scramble their fighters. The heroic pilots of the RAF, flying their iconic Spitfires and Hurricanes, inflicted heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. By the end of October, it was clear that Germany had failed to achieve air superiority. The invasion was called off. The Battle of Britain marked Germany's first major defeat in World War II, a crucial moment that ensured Britain would remain in the FITA permanent, unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of Nazi-occupied Europe. It proved that the Wehrmacht was not invincible after all. While Germany faced its first setback in the West, Hitler made a fateful and ultimately catastrophic decision. On June 22, 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This was the largest military invasion in history, involving over 3 million Axis troops. Driven by ideology, Hitler sought to destroy what he saw as Judeo-Bolshevism and seize the vast resources of the Soviet Union, especially its oil fields. Initially, the invasion was a staggering success. The Red Army, weakened by Stalin's purges of its officer corps, was caught completely off guard. German panzer divisions surged deep into Soviet territory, encircling and destroying entire armies. By autumn 1941, they were at the gates of Moscow. It looked like the Soviet Union would collapse, just as France had. But the Soviet Union was not France. Its sheer size became a weapon in itself. As the Germans advanced, the Soviets traded space for time, retreating deeper into the vastness of Russia. The scorched earth policy left nothing for the invaders. Then, the infamous Russian winter arrived. Temperatures plummeted to unimaginable lows. German equipment, designed for the temperate climate of Western Europe, froze solid. Soldiers, still in their summer uniforms, suffered horrific frostbite. The German offensive ground to a halt in the snows outside Moscow. Their supply lines stretched to the breaking point. The blitzkrieg had failed. Germany was now mired in a brutal war of attrition, on a second frontal war it could neither afford nor was prepared to fight. Many historians consider this decision to invade the USSR, Germany's single greatest strategic blunder of the war. While Germany was bleeding in the snows of Russia, its ally Japan was making its own audacious gamble. For years, Japan had been waging a brutal war of conquest in China. Its ambitions for a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere put it on a collision course with the United States, which had imposed a crippling oil embargo in response to Japanese aggression. Faced with economic strangulation, the Japanese High Command decided on a knockout blow. On December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier-based aircraft executed a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack was a stunning tactical success. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and a significant portion of the U.S. battleship fleet was sunk or crippled. In the days and weeks that followed, Japan ran rampant across the Pacific, conquering the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. But Pearl Harbor was also a strategic disaster of epic proportions. It shattered American isolationism overnight and united the country in a thirst for vengeance. On December 8th, the United States declared war on Japan. A few days later, in a move that still baffles historians, Hitler declared war on the United States, officially bringing America's industrial might into the European conflict. The first 6 months after Pearl Harbor were a string of humiliating defeats for the Allies, but the tide was about to turn in a battle that would change the course of the Pacific War in a single, decisive day. In June 1942, the Japanese Imperial Navy planned to lure the remnants of the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a trap at Midway Atoll, a tiny but strategic island northwest of Hawaii. The Japanese plan was complex, involving multiple fleets converging on the target. They had overwhelming numerical superiority, but the Americans had a secret weapon that was more powerful than any battleship: intelligence. U.S. Navy cryptanalysts, led by the brilliant Joseph Rochefort, had partially broken the Japanese naval code. They knew the Japanese were coming, where they were headed, and had a good idea of when. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, took a massive gamble. He committed his entire carrier, forced just 3 carriers, against Japan's 4-2 ambush, the ambushers. On June 4, 1942, as Japanese planes were attacking Midway, American dive bombers found the Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable moment. Their decks were crowded with planes being refueled and rearmed. In just 5 minutes, American bombs turned 3 Japanese carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryuin, to blazing wrecks. A 4th, the Hiryu, was sunk later that day. It was a stunning reversal of fortune. Japan lost 4 of its finest aircraft carriers and hundreds of its most experienced pilots' losses, from which it would never recover. The Battle of Midway was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. It ended Japan's offensive capability and allowed the United States to seize the strategic initiative. As the balance of power shifted in the Pacific, an even more titanic struggle was reaching its climax on the Eastern Front. After failing to take Moscow, Hitler's 1942 summer offensive, codenamed Operation Blue, targeted the oil fields of the Caucasus and the strategically important city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. Capturing Stalingrad would not only cut a vital Soviet supply artery, but also carry immense propaganda value. As the city bore the name of Hitler's arch-nemesis, Joseph Stalin, the German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, reached the outskirts of Stalingrad in late August and began a brutal, grinding assault on the city. What followed was some of the most savage fighting in human history. The battle for Stalingrad devolved into a nightmare of street-to-street, building-to-building, and even room-to-room combat. The Soviets, under the grim command of General Vasily Chukov, defended their city with suicidal tenacity. Every factory, every apartment block, every pile of rubble became a fortress. Life expectancy for a new soldier arriving at the front was sometimes measured in hours. While the Germans were being bled white in the meat grinder of the city, the Soviet High Command, under General Georgy Zhukov, was preparing a massive counterstroke. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. 2 huge pincer movements attacked the weak Romanian and Hungarian armies that were protecting the German flanks. Within days, the pincers met, and the entire German Sixth Army, estimated at around 250,000 to 300,000 men, was trapped inside the city they had sought to conquer. Hitler, in a display of fanatical delusion, forbade Paulus from attempting a breakout. He promised to supply the trapped army by air, but the Luftwaffe was incapable of such a feat. Starving, freezing, and out of ammunition, the last remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered on February 2, 1943. Stalingrad was an unmitigated disaster for the Third Reich. It marked the destruction of one of its best armies and dealt a psychological blow from which the German people and military would never recover. It is widely considered the single most important turning point of the war in Europe. From Stalingrad onward, the Red Army would be on the offensive, beginning the long, bloody road that would eventually lead to Berlin. We've just seen how 2 colossal battles in 1942, Midway and Stalingrad, completely changed the military momentum of the war. But battles are only part of the story. So before we move on, I want to ask you, which of these 2 do you think was more decisive for the overall outcome of the war? The naval victory at Midway or the grinding attrition of Stalingrad? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Military victories, no matter how decisive, don't happen in a vacuum. They rely on industrial production, logistical support, and political cooperation. And in this arena, the Allies had a decisive, war-winning advantage. Even before entering the war, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt understood the threat posed by Nazi Germany. In a fireside chat in December 1940, he declared that America must become the great arsenal of democracy. This concept was formalized in the Lend-Lease Act of March 1941. This ingenious piece of legislation allowed the U.S. to lend, lease, or supply war materials to any nation deemed vital to the defense of the United States. Initially aimed at a nearly bankrupt Great Britain, the program became a lifeline. It allowed Britain to continue the fight when it was on the verge of financial collapse. After the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Lend-Lease was extended to Stalin's regime. Over the course of the war, the United States sent billions of dollars worth of aid to its allies. This included not just weapons like tanks and aircraft, but also trucks, locomotives, food, fuel, and raw materials. To the Soviet Union alone, the U.S. sent over 400,000 trucks and jeeps, thousands of planes, and millions of tons of food. This aid was absolutely critical. While the Red Army did the bulk of the fighting and dying on the Eastern Front, it was American trucks that kept it mobile and American food that kept it fed. The Lend-Lease program was the industrial turning point of the war, proving that wars are won not just by soldiers, but by factories. The other crucial non-military turning point was the formation and management of the Grand Alliance. The partnership between the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, led by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, was an uneasy one. It was a coalition of capitalist democracies and a communist dictatorship, united only by their common enemy. Stalin was deeply suspicious of his Western allies, constantly demanding they open a second front in Western Europe to relieve pressure on the Red Army. Churchill and Roosevelt, in turn, were wary of Stalin's post-war ambitions. Despite the tensions and disagreements, the Big Three managed to coordinate their strategy to a degree the Axis powers never could. Hitler and Mussolini's alliance was often dysfunctional, and their coordination with Japan was virtually non-existent. The Allies, by contrast, held a series of high-level conferences throughout the war in Casablanca, Quebec, Tehran, and Yalta to hash out strategy and allocate resources. They agreed on a Germany-first strategy, recognizing that Nazi Germany was the most immediate and dangerous threat. This strategic coherence, this ability to plan and fight a truly global war as a unified coalition, was a decisive advantage. Churchill famously said, "The only thing worse than having allies is not having them." For the Axis, their inability to form a true, functioning alliance was a critical weakness. For the Allies, their ability to overcome their differences and cooperate was key to victory. Beneath the clash of armies and the debates of politicians, another war was being fought, a secret war in the laboratories and listening posts of the belligerent nations. Technology and intelligence played a role in World War II that was unprecedented in the history of warfare. We've already seen how radar helped win the Battle of Britain, but its impact was far broader. Improved radar systems, small enough to be fitted into aircraft, were instrumental in winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Allied planes equipped with radar could hunt and destroy German U-boats, even at night or in bad weather, turning the tide against the submarine menace that threatened to starve Britain into submission. Just as important as seeing the enemy was hearing them. The War of Intelligence was a battle of codes and ciphers. The most famous intelligence breakthrough of the war was the Allied cracking of Germany's Enigma machine. The Enigma was a sophisticated electromechanical device used by the German military to encrypt its most secret communications. The Germans considered it unbreakable. They were wrong. At a top-secret facility in England called Bletchley Park, a team of brilliant mathematicians, linguists, and engineers, including the now famous Alan Turing, worked tirelessly to break the Enigma codes. Their success gave Allied commanders an unprecedented window into the minds of the German High Command. They could read German orders, anticipate troop movements, and know the locations of their U-boats. The intelligence gleaned from Bletchley Park codenamed Ultra, was vital to victories in the Battle of the Atlantic, the North Africa Campaign, and the preparations for D-Day. On the other side of the world, it was the breaking of the Japanese Naval Code, JN-25, that led directly to the pivotal victory at Midway. These intelligence victories were silent, invisible turning points, saving countless lives and shortening the war by what some estimate to be years. The war also spurred a rapid acceleration of weapons technology. The Germans developed some of the most advanced weapons of the conflict, including the first jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262, and the V-2 ballistic missile, the world's first long-range guided missile, and the precursor to all modern rockets. Had these weapons been introduced earlier and in greater numbers, they could have had a significant impact. But the most significant and terrifying technological development of the war was taking place in secret laboratories across the United States. It was called the Manhattan Project, spurred by fears that Nazi Germany was developing its own nuclear weapon. The United States embarked on a massive, top-secret program to unlock the power of the atom. It was a colossal undertaking, costing billions of dollars and employing over 125,000 people. On July 16, 1945, in the desert of New Mexico, the project culminated in the successful test of the world's first atomic bomb. By 1944, the tide had irrevocably turned. The Soviet Union was relentlessly pushing the Germans back on the Eastern Front. In the Pacific, U.S. forces were island-hopping their way toward Japan. The operation, codenamed Overlord, was the most complex and ambitious amphibious invasion in history. On June 6, 1944, an enormous Allied armada of over 5,000 ships carried more than 150,000 soldiers across the English Channel to the beaches of Normandy. The landings were preceded by a massive airborne assault, with thousands of paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines to secure key objectives and sow confusion. The fighting on the beaches, particularly on Omaha Beach, was ferocious. But by the end of the day, the Allies had secured a foothold in France. D-Day was the turning point that sealed Germany's fate. It forced Hitler to fight a major war on two fronts, a strategic nightmare from which there was no escape. After weeks of brutal fighting in the dense hedgerows of Normandy, the Allies broke out and began a rapid advance across France. In August, Paris was liberated. By autumn, the Allies were at the borders of Germany itself. In a final, desperate gamble, Hitler launched a surprise offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, hoping to split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace. The resulting conflict, the Battle of the Bulge, was the largest and bloodiest battle fought by the United States in the war. After initial successes, the German offensive stalled and was ultimately pushed back. It was the last gasp of the German war machine in the West.